Everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into something that might seem kind of basic at first glance.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about the whole absolute versus relative truth thing, and then subjective versus objective truth.
Yeah.
But honestly, one of our sources actually made a really good point that sometimes, going back and revisiting those fundamentals can actually provide a ton of clarity. So we're not shying away from it.
It's true.
We're going deep.
Yeah.
And we've got a really cool mix of stuff to look at for this one. I'm excited.
Me too. I mean, we're talking about ideas that philosophers have been, wrestling with for centuries.
Oh, yeah.
And then right up to how people are debating this stuff in online forums today.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting landscape.
It is.
Yeah. We're looking at, we pulled from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Oh, yeah.
Some heavy hitters there.
Big time.
Things like pragmatism.
Yeah.
Right. So that's is an idea useful? And then relativism, maybe truth depends on your viewpoint.
Right.
And then the correspondence theory where truth matches up with reality.
Classic.
We also have from Wikipedia their take on epistemology.
Okay.
Which is pretty much the study of knowledge itself.
Right.
So kind of meta.
Yeah.
But it's not all dusty old books.
Yeah.
We are also diving into Reddit.
Always fun.
I know, right? With discussions like, do you believe in an objective truth? Do you struggle with arguing because of it?
Oh, yeah.
Which is so real.
Very real.
I feel that. And then we've got some pretty strong statements like, there is no such thing as my truth and your truth. There is only the truth.
Yeah. People get really passionate about this stuff.
Hey, for sure. Yeah. We also have perspectives from women in apologetics.
Okay.
We have some insights from a PNAS article.
Wow.
We even have a Ben Shapiro quote from Goodreads.
Interesting.
Just to mix it up. Yeah. Why not?
And then an excerpt from The Challenge of Cultural Relativism.
Nice.
So we are all over the place.
Awesome.
It's going to be great. I think what's really interesting is just seeing how these big philosophical ideas kind of show up.
Right.
In everyday conversations.
You'd be surprised.
Oh, yeah. Often in very raw form.
For sure.
So our goal today is to unpack all these different angles on truth, understand how they're being used, how they're being understood, and really try to grasp what it all means for how we actually live in the world.
Yeah.
And, we want to do that in a way that clicks.
Of course.
Without making it feel like a philosophy lecture.
Right. Exactly.
So, where do we even start with all of it?
Well, I think, how about we just start with the most fundamental question?
Okay.
What is truth?
I love that. And that's exactly where Women in Apologetics newsletter starts, which is a perfect launching point for us.
And they jump right into it. They highlight this crucial distinction between absolute truth versus relative truth.
Okay.
So what's their take on why this even matters? Why is this distinction so important?
Well, their main concern seems to be that if truth is, if it's only true for you, it kind of undermines our ability to share beliefs.
Right.
Or even have a meaningful conversation about what we believe is real or right.
Right, because if everyone's truth is equally valid, then how do you even begin to talk about different viewpoints?
Exactly. Yeah. It becomes almost impossible to even have a discussion.
You're just talking past each other.
Secretly, you're just in your own little world.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because it really echoes some of the the tension that we saw in those Reddit discussions.
Oh, yeah.
There's one user who makes this distinction between objective facts and truth.
Okay.
And they're suggesting that the word truth itself carries a lot of personal baggage. It's not just about whether something happened, but it's what it means.
Oh, yeah.
To that individual.
That's a really subtle but important distinction.
For sure.
And it actually kind of reminds me of what another Reddit commenter said.
Oh, yeah.
Who argued that a lot of what we call truth is actually just opinions and perceptions about experiences.
Right.
And they gave this great example.
Okay.
About finding beets disgusting.
Okay. Yeah.
Which, that's a very personal experience. Subjective feeling.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that beets are objectively and universally disgusting.
Exactly.
It's just that you find them disgusting.
Right.
Yeah. So the beet example is perfect, right?
Yeah.
Because it really shows how a personal preference isn't the same as a factual claim about the world.
Exactly.
And I think it really highlights how loaded this word truth can be.
It really is.
And a lot of the Reddit users were saying that they're it's just an overloaded term.
Right.
It's used in so many different ways.
Yeah.
That its meaning can get really fuzzy.
Totally.
So, I mean, even just right out of the gate, we see this split, right, where some people are leaning towards a more objective, factual understanding of truth, and others are like, no, it's all about individual experience.
And
perspective.
It's all relative.
Yeah, that shapes what we see as true.
Yeah.
So that kind of sets the stage.
Okay.
For diving deeper.
All right.
Into this whole concept of objective truth.
Okay.
And, we found a pretty strong stance on that.
Oh, yeah.
In a few of our sources.
Yeah.
Like multiple Reddit users.
Right.
And then that pasted text excerpt, they're very firm in the belief.
Okay.
That there's only one truth.
Okay.
So the core idea here is that reality just IS.
Yeah.
Whether we like it or not, it's what it is, regardless of what we believe.
Right.
Or how we perceive it.
It's independence.
Exactly. So truth, in this view, it doesn't change from person to person.
Yeah.
It just IS.
It's fixed.
Yeah. And the pasted text really hits this point home.
Okay.
By warning about the dangers of phrases like my truth.
Right.
Because they're saying that it can be used to justify straight up falsehoods.
Right.
Twisting the facts.
Yeah.
Avoiding responsibility.
That's a slippery.
It really is. And the worry is that if everyone is just operating with their own version of truth, then truth itself loses all meaning.
Right.
Right? You can't have any real communication.
Exactly.
You can't have a shared understanding of the world.
Yeah.
It just breaks down.
It does.
So, I mean, this brings up a huge question.
Yeah.
What even underpins this conviction?
Yeah.
In objective truth?
Yeah.
What is it based on?
Right.
One Reddit user had this really interesting thought.
Oh, really?
Suggesting that objective truth might be connected to a higher power.
Oh, interesting.
To God, to divine love.
Okay.
And they acknowledge that this kind of truth might not always be super obvious.
Yeah.
Right. In our everyday material world, which they kind of see as potentially a mix of truth and untruth.
Interesting. So that brings in a whole other dimension to this.
It does.
Spiritual, moral dimension.
Yeah. And we also see in the Reddit discussions this persistent idea.
Okay.
That even though it's hard, grasping objective truth can be really challenging.
Yeah.
It's still a worthy goal.
Right.
Especially when we're trying to figure out what actually happened.
Yeah, the truth of events.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's kind of flip the coin here and explore the other side.
Right.
Subjective truth, relativism, all that.
Right.
And that pasted text we keep mentioning.
Yeah.
They have a pretty direct take on this whole my truth thing.
Okay.
Right. They describe it as something that sounds beautiful, personal, and deep.
Yeah.
But when you really think about it, it doesn't hold up.
Right.
So what's at the core of that argument?
Well, I think the main point they're making is that while our individual experiences and perspectives are totally valid, for us, they don't equal truth.
Okay.
In a broader sense.
Okay.
Just because I experience something in a certain way doesn't make it a universal truth.
It's just your truth.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And that critique of my truth leads us right into this idea of relativism.
Okay.
Which the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and Wikipedia dive into.
Big time.
Yeah. And they explain that basically relativism is pushing back against the idea of a single correct viewpoint.
That's right.
Which is called monism.
Monism.
Yeah.
Got it.
And also the idea that truth is objective and singular. They're saying, no, not so fast.
Yeah.
It's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
So what's the main claim of this whole truth relativism thing?
Well, as Wikipedia puts it, it's basically that what's true for one person or a group might not be true for another.
Okay.
So truth isn't this absolute thing. It's relative to a specific framework.
Yeah.
Whether that's an individual's beliefs, a cultural perspective, or, some other set of standards.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
One really interesting idea.
Oh, yeah.
That came up when we were looking at relativism in the Stanford Encyclopedia.
Okay.
Is this whole faultless disagreements concept.
Faultless disagreements.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me more.
I know, it's kind of a weird one.
Yeah.
So can you unpack that a little bit?
I'll try my best. So, faultless disagreements. It's basically suggesting that you can have two people who totally disagree.
Right.
And both of their positions can be considered true
What?
from their own perspective.
No.
And neither one of them is wrong.
That's so wild.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to understand those situations where it feels like both sides have a valid point.
Yeah, but that's like completely counterintuitive.
It is.
To the way we usually think about disagreements.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Like usually when we disagree, we're like, okay, someone's wrong.
Yeah. Someone's got to be off.
Yeah.
But this is saying, no. You can both be right.
I see.
At the same time.
Yeah. But then that like raises the question.
Yeah.
If no one's wrong, then what even is a disagreement?
Exactly, yeah. What are we even doing?
Yeah. So the Stanford Encyclopedia also talked about something called conceptual relativism.
Oh.
How does that differ from like the general idea of relativism?
So conceptual relativism, it's a bit of a different angle.
Okay.
Instead of saying that the truth of something depends on who you are, it's saying that the very categories we use to understand the world can vary.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like think of it like this.
Okay.
Our mind actually shape how we see reality.
Right.
Through like these frameworks we use, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And those frameworks might be different across cultures, across languages.
Right.
So what exists, how we understand it, that's ontology, becomes relative to these schemes.
Yeah.
These frameworks, these conceptual schemes.
Oh, sure.
So it's not just that our opinions differ, it's that the way we even see reality is different.
The fundamental category.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a mind bender.
It's a lot. Okay, so, I mean, as you can imagine, this whole idea of relativism has not gone unchallenged.
Of course not.
Right.
Yeah.
Both the Stanford Encyclopedia and Wikipedia discuss Plato. Oh, yeah.
And his famous critique of Protagoras.
Right.
Who was like this key figure in early relativism.
Right.
So what was Plato's beef with relativism?
Well, basically, his argument was that if relativism claims that all truth is relative,
right,
then that very statement, all truth is relative, would also have to be relative.
Yeah.
So if someone believes in absolute truth, then for them, that statement, all truth is relative, would be false. It's kind of like self-defeating.
Yeah.
It undermines its own premise.
So it's like they're saying our truth is that truth is relative.
Right.
And your truth is that truth is absolute.
Yeah.
And both can be true within their own systems.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really solve the problem.
No, it just kicks the can down the road.
It really does.
Yeah. And actually, the Stanford Encyclopedia brings up this idea of performative contradiction. Like, if a relativist really, truly believes that all truth is relative, why would they even try to convince anyone?
Right.
The act of arguing kind of implies that they think their position is somehow better.
Yeah. It doesn't quite line up.
It doesn't.
Okay, so then there's ethical relativism,
okay,
which Wikipedia and the challenge of cultural relativism touch on.
Right.
And this is the idea that like right and wrong aren't universal.
Right.
They depend on cultural norms.
Cultural values, yeah.
Yeah.
And like the example that they give about female excision in Togo is a really like stark illustration of this. Like it's a practice that, many people in the West find just abhorrent, like a violation of human rights.
Of course.
But within those specific cultural contexts, it's seen as a traditional rite of passage.
Right.
And it highlights this discomfort that I think a lot of people feel about judging other cultures.
Yeah.
Even when the practices seem so wrong to us.
Yeah, you don't want to be like imposing your values.
Exactly. Yeah. But the challenge of cultural relativism also brings up a counterpoint to that.
Okay.
They say, well, maybe there are some fundamental moral principles, like the well-being of a culture's members, that are kind of common to all societies.
That makes sense.
So it's like, maybe not everything is ethically relative.
Right. There might be some common ground.
Exactly.
Okay. So all this discussion about the nature of truth kind of leads us to look at different philosophical frameworks.
Yeah.
Right.
Makes sense.
That try to like make sense of it all.
Right.
So let's dive into pragmatism a little bit.
Okay.
Which the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy describes as, this tradition that really questions the idea that our language and thoughts perfectly mirror the world.
Right.
So what's like the key takeaway from pragmatism? Like how does it change our perspective?
Well, I think the main shift is to move away from like trying to figure out if our beliefs perfectly match reality.
Okay.
And instead, look at how well those beliefs actually work for us.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's less about being right.
Yeah.
And more about like, does it work? Does it function?
Like Richard Rorty, he argued that truth isn't really like this deep property of a statement that corresponds to reality, but more like a label.
Okay.
We give to beliefs that we find useful.
Interesting.
That help us achieve our goals.
So less about like perfect match with reality, more about practical consequences.
Yeah, exactly.
And inquiry, like the process of seeking knowledge is a huge part of this.
Oh, yeah.
And the Stanford Encyclopedia talks about Charles Sanders Peirce.
Okay.
And his idea that inquiry is about going from like a state of doubt to settled belief. And he argued that the method of science is the most reliable way to fix a belief because it's open to revision, right? Based on evidence and scrutiny.
Yeah.
And he contrasted that with, less reliable methods.
Like what?
Like just sticking to your guns no matter what.
Right.
Blindly trusting authority.
Yeah.
Or just like relying on what sounds good logically.
Right.
So like he had a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And then, there's John Dewey.
Oh, yeah.
Another key figure in pragmatism.
Yeah.
And he had his own spin on inquiry. Right.
Yeah. He saw inquiry as starting with like a problem.
Okay.
A problematic situation, something uncertain.
Right.
And trying to move towards something more like stable.
Okay.
More determinate.
So like actually solving real world issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So let's move on to some like specific theories. That try to define what truth is.
Right.
Like the correspondence theory.
Okay.
That's probably what most people like intuitively think of when they think of truth.
Yeah, probably.
Right. Like a statement is true if it corresponds to reality.
It matches up.
Yeah. So the Stanford Encyclopedia and Common Talk, they both like explain this as truth being about this relationship.
Okay.
Between our beliefs, our statements, propositions, like the way the world actually is.
Right.
The truth makers.
Okay.
So if what we're saying aligns with what's real, then it's true.
Makes sense.
And, Stanford Encyclopedia actually gets even more granular.
Oh, yeah.
And talks about primary truth bearers.
Okay.
Which are like the original source of truth.
Right.
And then secondary truth bearers.
Okay.
Which get their truth from those primary.
Interesting.
It's complicated.
It is.
Okay, so then we have the coherent story of truth, which Common Talk describes as like how well a claim fits within like a bigger system of beliefs.
Right. It's all about internal consistency.
Exactly.
Like think of it like, a detective piecing together clues.
Right.
For a new piece of evidence to be true. Yeah.
It has to fit with everything else they already know.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is you could have a system that's perfectly internally consistent.
Yeah.
But completely detached from reality.
That's true. It's true. Okay, so what about the consensus?
Oh, the consensus theory is a simple one.
Okay.
It's basically truth is what everyone agrees on.
Okay.
If there's a consensus, then it must be true.
But I mean, the problem there is pretty obvious, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just because everyone agrees doesn't mean it's right.
Tons of examples of that throughout history.
Right.
Yeah.
Like flat Earth.
Exactly.
And then we have the pragmatic theory of truth,
okay.
which brings us back to this idea of usefulness.
Right. Yeah.
So according to that theory,
a
statement is true if it's like useful or beneficial to believe it.
Right. If it helps you navigate the world, it's true.
But then again, something can be useful and not necessarily true in like the traditional sense. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's messy.
It is.
So, I mean, what this all shows is that there's not one easy answer.
Right.
To what truth is.
No.
It's complicated.
It is.
And these different theories give us different lenses.
Right.
Through which to like evaluate claims.
Different ways of looking at it.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, so let's chat about like that basic philosophical distinction between subjectivity and objectivity.
Okay.
Subjectivity, as Wikipedia explains it, is all about like our individual experiences, our feelings, our perspectives. Yeah. It's how things seem to us.
Right.
Objectivity is about what's real.
Yeah.
Independent of us.
Right.
Regardless of our perceptions.
So it's like the difference between how things seem and how things actually are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, we saw this great example in one of the Reddit threads.
Oh, yeah.
They were like, I love pizza. That's subjective.
Right.
It's about personal taste.
Totally.
Water boils at 100 degrees C. Objective.
Fact.
Like, regardless of whether you believe it or not, it's going to happen.
It's true.
Yeah. So it's fascinating how different fields like grapple with this.
Right. That's true.
Wikipedia talks about history, for example.
Right.
It's always trying to balance like those subjective accounts with the desire for an objective understanding of the past.
Right.
Like historians have to rely on like testimonies.
Yeah.
On documents.
Right. Which are inherently influenced by like personal biases, right?
Totally.
But they're